There's a lot of things to learn growing up on a ranch, I think, that will make a better person of you as you grow older. As you grow older and you think back of all the things that you were taught on the ranch, I think it comes into your life for the rest of your life, and it makes a better person of you. I do believe that. Okay, I was not born at Canoa Ranch. When my mom was pregnant with me, we lived out here, but when it came time for me to show up, they had to take us into town. And we didn't go to the hospital, we went to a little place called the Stork's Nest. My cowboy days were right here at Canoa. About 12 years old, I think, was about the first time I remember doing a roundup, and being a roper with my dad at the rodeo, I got the job of roping the calves and dragging them over to the fire where they would brand the calves. Well, I got a big kick out of that, until you have to do it all day long and tomorrow and maybe the day after. So I get short-winded on that. But the roundup would come in from the highway right through this opening here and into here. And I remember when my dad had just come home from the Army, and I was probably maybe 4 years old, it seems like. And he would sit me up on this wall right here, and we'd watch the cattle come in, because it would just fill this area. There was that much cattle. It would just fill this area, and then they'd put them in the corrals through the back there. But that was pretty exciting for a 4-year-old kid. Indian-wise, my granddad did converse with the Indians that were around. There didn't seem to be that many. There were a lot of Mexican people that came up from the border, especially during roundup. We would get cowboys from all over the place, where you always help the other rancher. And there would be a lot of cowboys from Pozo Nuevo or Agua Caliente, whatever ranch was closest to us. Would supply cowboys, and we in turn would help the other ranches. And so we got a lot of saddle sores in there. Chores at the ranch, there was a lot to do, not especially for me, but my dad and my granddad, and then when it would come my turn to have to do something, my job was cutting wood for the fireplace, because that was our only heat in the wintertime, was the fireplace. And several rooms had fireplaces, so it took quite a bit of wood. Chopping wood for a couple hours for a young guy of 12, 13 years old was not the biggest fun in the world. There's so many other things I thought I could be doing. But that was part of my chores, cutting wood, feeding the chickens. There was a huge chicken pen behind us. One end was enclosed for the hens to lay their eggs in, and that was my chores. It was that and going on roundup, because we would ride quite a ways. We'd go, the ranch went all the way to the Barraquivries. So bringing the cattle across the highway, we would stop the traffic on the highway, because the Nogales Highway at that time was only 2 lanes. It was just, small highway. But then we'd cross the highway, bring them into the ranch, and bring them right into the middle of the ranch, where you see all the open space between the houses and the longhouse and house, that big area. We'd go through there with the cattle into the corrals on the south side. The cattle that came off the range, they aren't very adept at people being around or strange areas or even being in a corral. So these corrals had to be real thick and very strong, because the cattle were range cattle. They weren't something that grew up in a pen. And if they got unruly, they could push a fence over, but these were built to withstand that. On horseback, you can ride up to a gate, and you'd have to get off if you had to get down below, so the guy could stay on his horse and work this gate from the top. It's latched right now. unlatch that, and open the gate. Standard meal for breakfast, we had beans for breakfast, we had beans for lunch, we had beans for supper. But Grandma always made biscuits. Every morning, she made the best biscuits in the world. And if I was going out the door to an early roundup, boy, she had a bag of biscuits for me, and we'd throw it on the saddle, and that was lunch. But yeah, a lot of beans and biscuits. But as I grew up, I remember most of Canoa. I remember the different houses, and Hal Manning's house and Hal Jr.'s house that we're in now. And we were in what was called the Long House. That was the foreman's house. And that used to be a school. That's what I was told. All those rooms were not separated with doorways. They were separate rooms. The only one that had a doorway between the living room and the kitchen, and all the other rooms in that long building were classrooms. And although we weren't allowed to go in there, it was all locked up. It was storing the desk of years ago. But we lived in that house for several years. My granddad was the foreman here at Canoa. Originally, he was the foreman at Agua Caliente. And Hal brought him and hired him for out here. And from there, my granddad took over the ranch for the cowboys and the roundups. And mostly beyond that, his job was to clear fields. Hal had bought a Caterpillar, and my granddad cleared fields. He built dirt tanks for the water tanks and windmills all over the ranch, all the way up to Arivaca and beyond the Babakivris. I think one of the neatest things about all of these houses is that they're all adobe.
Sorry.
They're not brick, mortar, or anything like that. It's all adobe. But this was the Manning Jr. house, and I might mention at that point that employees, as we were, my family, you're never invited inside the home. That was just one of the things the Mannings just took for granted. They were the masters of the residence, and sometimes they would have parties outside. I don't recall going to those, but I was just a little kid at that time. This particular small building was Hal Manning's office. We called it an office. I think he called it a retreat. He would come out from the house, and he would, sometimes I understood he even spent nights in here to get away from whatever. But just outside this building here is a telephone pole, and inside, of course, the phone. Hal always used to complain about the phone was always ringing, ringing, ringing. He was always having to answer the phone. So one afternoon, I understand, D.Z. Manning told me this, that he went outside, took his shotgun, and blew the phone box off the pole. I think the windmills pretty well took care of all the water needs. I don't know actually where the water came from down the canal that is behind the ranch here. The whole length of the ranch there with big, big, big trees on each side of that. And that took water to the lake. Well, my aunt and I would go down, and we would sit on the dock. There was a dock there, and we'd watch the catfish in the water, and probably throw stones at them or something, some silly thing that kids do. But there was also a rowboat, and we'd go out in the lake in the rowboat. I could not swim, and my aunt would just terrify me, and she did it on purpose. I know she did. Oh, the thing is rocking, we might turn over and we might sink, and oh, I'm just hysterical. But that was when I was much younger. I was probably 8 or 9. Yeah, she was mean. Not really. She grew up to be a very lovely person. She actually lived with us as my mom and I moved to Tucson. She lived with us and went to Amphitheater High School, started Amphitheater High School with me, and then later she transferred to Pueblo. And my grandparents moved to Tucson as they left the ranch here. And they lived in a trailer court next to our property on Roger Road. And but that was sort of the end of the ranching days. Ranching days were over pretty much for us.